A few hours later, Lu Sheng and Harold went to the conference room of the base. Our boy was sitting and browsing his mobile phone, while on the other side, Harold was standing next to him. Lu Sheng made a video call with his sister King. She started showing 2 fingers, closed her eyes and with a kind smile mentioned that she hoped to see him again soon, promising that he was going to be greatly surprised since she had almost finished muscle and bone training and would soon ascend to level 4. Lu Sheng began observing his sister, and his eyes widened with joy. With a proud smile, he said that he knew how incredible his little sister was. He asked her to give the phone to their parents since he wanted to talk to them. King nodded and handed the mobile phone to her father. Upon seeing Lu Sheng, the mother's eyes filled with tears and happiness. With a worried smile, she admitted that she was somewhat concerned about him. She was happy to see that he was doing well and asked him to finish his mission quickly and returned to them since everyone missed him. The father, who was behind her, closed his eyes and began to show a smile. Lu Sheng remained silent, watching his parents. His eyes started to shine. With a smile, he promised to return as soon as possible, asking them to take care of themselves. After talking with them, Lu Sheng ended the video call and remained looking at the phone screen in silence. The eyes of Marshal Saint Harold, who was standing beside him, widened in confusion. His attention was fixed on Lu Sheng's mobile phone, and he began to sweat without knowing what was happening. He started staring at Lu Sheng, and with a curious gaze, he realized that the supposed god had parents who were no more than 50 years old, and his younger sister was not yet of age. He did not know how old this god really was. With a smile, Lu Sheng continued browsing his mobile phone. The jaw of poor Marshal Saint Harold dropped, and his eyes expanded in fear. He simply could not believe it. Lu Sheng was precisely a young man whose age did not even reach that of his great-great-grandson. Just a few hours ago, our boy had instantly and effortlessly killed 2 level 9 Marshal Saints, directly eliminating the leaders of 2 major mysterious organizations in the world. His eyes widened in surprise, and he couldn't help but sweat profusely. He knew that if he spread this news, no one would believe him. He used to mock the new rumors about the Marshal Saint of the Dragon Kingdom, realizing that Lu Sheng was the new Marshal Saint. He began to imagine Lu Sheng with his hands in his pants pockets, smiling and surrounded by an intense martial energy. He had killed 3 Marshal Saints. A question came to Harold's mind. He didn't know how many more level 9 warriors existed in this world. For him, this was terrifying. While Harold was lost in his thoughts, Lu Sheng was on a video call with his friends. With a cheerful expression, he started pointing at Harold with his finger and decided to say goodbye to them since there were still people waiting for him to discuss matters. Upon hearing this, Harold came out of his trance, and his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He could not believe that someone as strong as Lu Sheng really existed in this world. Lu Sheng put the mobile phone in front of Harold and focused on his face. He closed his eyes and, with a nervous smile, began to wave at Lu Sheng's friends. Lu Sheng turned off the mobile phone and placed it on the table. Then he turned to Harold, and his eyes filled with gratitude. He began to observe Harold and, with a smile, thanked him for his cooperation. Harold lowered his head before him and mentioned that it was an honor for him to serve Lu Sheng. Our boy took out the sample of energy crystal that he had in his pocket, began to observe it with a curious expression. He decided that it was time to talk about their matter. He asked if Harold knew what this thing was. The energy crystal began to shine intensely. Harold's attention fixed on it and his eyes widened in surprise. He began to sweat and ponder in silence. He placed his hand over his chest, closed his eyes again, lowered his head before him, and with a sincere expression asked how many energy crystals Lu Sheng needed. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng turned to him and with a curious gaze asked how many energy crystals Harold could obtain. Harold's eyes began to shine with seriousness and in a sincere tone. He hesitated for a second until he revealed that he could obtain 1 kilogram of energy crystals. Upon hearing this, an excited smile spread across Lu Sheng's face and his eyes began to shine with joy. Originally, he had only asked out of pure curiosity and did not expect Harold to think he was extorting him. He was happy because he had managed to obtain many resources from Harold and his organization. Lu Sheng's body began to emit orange martial energy. His attention fixed on her. old, and he couldn't help but smile. A few grams of energy crystals could make his immortal cells progress by leaps and bounds. With a kilogram, he feared it would be more than enough to reach the true limit of his level 8 stellar body. While Harold had his head lowered, Lu Sheng placed his hand under his chin and began to ponder. A question came to his mind. He didn't know if he looked like someone so terrifying that Harold thought he was a villain. Lu Sheng snapped out of his trance, turned to Harold, and with a cheerful smile mentioned that it seemed like he had many energy crystals. Harold raised his head and his eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped, revealing that he actually did not have many energy crystals. In these 100 years, he had only accumulated a few hundred grams. But since Lu Sheng had killed the leaders of Dark Star and the Black Magic Society, if he took over their territories, he would be able to gather a kilogram of energy crystals. With a curious expression, Lu Sheng asked if the production of energy crystals was really so scarce. Harold's expression changed and his eyes filled with seriousness. He extended his hand and explained that although finding energy crystal deposits was rare, there was no shortage. He began to imagine a man with 3 eyes, with a gaze full of fear. Harold mentioned that every time energy crystals were produced, the 9% had to be given to the guides. And only 10% of what was produced was distributed among all the martial saints of the world. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng became curious. He started staring at Harold and asked who the guides were. His eyes widened in fear and seriousness. He began to sweat, not knowing if the guides were the deity that had appeared in his battle against Zhao Ji. Harold extended his hands, approached Lu Sheng, and with a sincere expression mentioned that it seemed Lu Sheng should not know this, and also that the guides had probably not yet had time to contact Lu Sheng. Our boy began to observe Harold and listen attentively in silence. Harold started to imagine a group of men wearing masks, and revealed that the job of the guides was to register the number of level 9 martial saints and, along the way, collect energy crystals. He had discovered this secret in his 7th year as a martial saint. With a calm gaze, Lu Sheng interrupted him by giving him the order to get to the point. Harold extended his hand and began to imagine a powerful hooded deity. His eyes started to shine seriously as he explained that the guides were powerful martial artists from planets with advanced civilizations, possessing power far greater than that of a level 9 warrior. No one knew if they were level 10 or even higher. They had appeared since year 1 of the martial path, leading the rise of martial arts. When in the Blue Star 9 level martial saints emerged, the guides descended to establish a new world order, organizing the warriors of each nation and collecting energy crystals together. The guides never intervened in conflicts between nations, except when too many 9 level martial saints fell. And only then would they descend to impose punishments. Lu Sheng remained calm and with a curious gaze asked if the guides were going to intervene if 3 martial saints died. Harold's eyes began to shine. He started staring at Lu Sheng and replied no, since the last time the guides intervened was in the battle between the Dragon Kingdom and Lion, with more than 10 martial saints dead and injured. In fact, the supervision of the guides over them was quite lax. They only cared about 3 things. The first was the issue of energy crystal production. If production decreased, the guides would get angry, and in severe cases the martial saints had to pay out of their own pockets to meet the quota. The second was the invasion of exotic beasts. They had to suppress beast invasions below a safe threshold. If disturbances greater than expected occurred, the martial saints were obligated to intervene to repel the beasts. Harold's eyes widened in fear, making him sweat. He approached Lu Sheng and revealed that without the permission of the guides, the appearance of a martial arts expert of level 9 or higher was not allowed on the day. Assumed that this was established to facilitate resource collection for the guides, revealing that their planet was called a first-level resource star. Lu Sheng crossed his arms and began to gaze at the ground in silence. His eyes started to shine with hatred as this coincided with what he had seen in the dream space. He began to imagine a powerful deity controlling the world. Without level 10 martial artists, the limit of local martial power was maintained. An advanced civilization led the martial development of the indigenous, facing invasions from exotic beasts while collecting rare and valuable resources from the planet, all while restricting the birth of strong warriors. The gaze of our boy fixed on Harold. With a serious expression, he asked what they should do when a warrior capable of surpassing level 9 was born. Harold froze, thinking in silence, and his eyes widened in surprise. With an uncertain expression, he said that he did not know. With a serious expression, he explained that the path to ascend beyond level 9 was in the hands of the guides. Without help, there was no way to break that limit. Lu Sheng put his hand under his chin, closed his eyes, and began to think in silence. Then his eyes started to shine with determination, and he asked when the guides were coming next time. With an uncertain expression, Harold looked away and explained that the guides were going to arrive in a few months, but he was not sure about the details. Each time they were received by a representative of the martial saints from the World Martial Arts Association. But it was certain that they always came after the collection of energy crystals at the World Masters Congress. Lu Sheng started to gaze at the ground with a confused expression and asked if the World Masters Conference had been created for the purpose of collecting energy crystals and distributing quotas. Harold began to look down at the ground in silence. With a sincere gaze, he replied yes, explaining that any warrior who had the level of martial saint could attend. Dark Star and Black Magic Society only wanted more shares, and for this reason, they had joined forces to attack Harold, since after all, if there was one less person sharing the cake, the others could eat a little more. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with tranquility. He turned to Harold and asked if many martial saints attended. With a serene gaze, Harold began to imagine the powerful martial saints and revealed that it could be said that all the martial saints who could attend would be present. Lu Sheng rested his hand on the table and stood up with an excited smile. He asked if he could accompany Harold when the time came. Harold began to observe Lu Sheng in silence until he placed his hand on his chest and his eyes widened with joy. With a smile, he mentioned that it would be an honor for him. He couldn't believe that someone as powerful as Lu Sheng wanted to attend and support his association, realizing that this time the distribution quota for his association was going to be higher than ever. Lu Sheng turned toward him and, with a smile, decided not to take Harold's. He only asked to be given Dark Stars and Black Magic Society's share. He also asked him to take good care of Nepson for him and not shatter his sweet illusions since Lu Sheng still had a few more wishes left to grant him. Harold joined his hands in joy and with a smile accepted. Lu Sheng turned his back and slowly began to walk away, deciding that it was time to leave. Harold panicked, reached out to him, and with a curious gaze, asked what his current strength. Lu Sheng kept walking until he stopped, turned his head, and while his eyes were shining, he smiled and replied that he was a level 8 warrior. Harold closed his eyes and sighed, as he thought Lu Sheng was a level 10 warrior. But then, his jaw dropped and he transformed into Usopp from One Piece upon seeing that Lu Sheng was a level 8 warrior. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel. The next day, early in the morning, while the sun was illuminating everything, Lu Sheng approached the window and began to observe the landscape with a cheerful smile. Our boy activated his mental power, making the liquid inside the bucket gradually start to float. Lu Sheng extended his hand and all the liquid started to float in the air. He began to observe it and his eyes filled with determination. With a smile, he decided to try it. He opened his mouth and the liquid began to enter his mouth. In an instant, Lu Sheng drank all the liquid. Behind him was the bucket. Our boy's attention was fixed on it. With a surprised expression, he realized that this high-purity water was really good. He began to imagine a beautiful waterfall in the jungle. You see, this was the spiritual water with the highest purity in the world, coming from the depths of the northern mountain range of the Lion Kingdom. After being extracted, it had to go through more than 100 complex processes for its refinement. Just one bucket of this water could cost billions. Lu Sheng's eyes expanded with confidence. He had been submerged in the tube of spiritual marrow liquid for more than a year without ingesting any food, which in a certain sense could also be considered as a kind of fasting. He could not contain himself any longer and snapped his fingers. Some elegant waiters carrying delicious meat dishes opened the door and began to enter one after another. They filled Lu Sheng's table with delicious dishes of all kinds, from meat to croissants. Our boy grabbed the fork and knife and his gaze fixed on the food, his mouth watered. As eating meat always made him feel good. Our boy put down the fork and knife, grabbed a steak with his hands, and took a bite. His eyes closed, and a pleasant smile appeared on his face. These days, his mouth had been so tasteless that even his taste buds had forgotten what flavor was. Just then, a sexy woman holding a wooden chest entered the room. She was a blonde woman with green eyes. She approached Lu Sheng and, with a kind smile, mentioned that the divine seal wanted to give him this chest. Lu Sheng, who was absorbed in eating, came out of his trance, turned towards her, and upon seeing the chest, his eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. The woman opened the chest. Inside were energy crystals that were shining intensely due to their high purity. She revealed that there were a total of 436 grams. Despite feeling somewhat surprised, Lu Sheng remained calm, closed his eyes, and wiped the food remnants from his mouth with the help of a napkin. With a tranquil expression, he realized that Harold had been very generous. In an instant, he finished all the food, stood up, turned his back to the woman, and while he was walking away, he asked the woman to let him know the day Harold was ready to leave. The woman closed her eyes, placed her hands over her abdomen, bowed her head before Lu Sheng as a sign of respect, and with a smile bid farewell to the great martial saint. Somewhere in the central military district of the Dragon Kingdom, there were large and luxurious skyscrapers, and one of them was the army's conference building. Inside were all the marshals of the Dragon Kingdom. The Eastern Marshal, who was holding a report, began to look at the others, and his eyes widened with happiness. With a joyful expression, he informed them that according to the latest reliable news, Lu Sheng had fully recovered and returned. Upon hearing this, the Southern Marshal's eyes also filled with happiness. He began to observe the Eastern Marshal and couldn't help but smile. One of the marshals present at the conference became curious and asked if they could now contact Lu Sheng. With a serious gaze, the Marshal of the East explained that they could not, for the moment. Only Lu Sheng had been communicating with them unilaterally, and by tracking the source of the signal, it could be determined that he was approximately near the ocean in the southern part of the Eagle Kingdom. The eyes of the Marshal of the Central District filled with tranquility. He left the report on the table, intertwined his hands, and with a smile decided not to speak further on the matter and move on to the next topic. He asked if they should continue sending representatives to the Great World Masters Tournament. The attention of the Marshal of the East fixed on him, and his eyes began to shine with rage. In previous years, the army sent elite warriors to participate in the great competition with the goal of fostering the birth of a powerful martial saint-level warrior. And although the army suffered losses, the warriors continued to participate enthusiastically. But now that Lu Sheng existed, who was destined to become the future martial saint of the army, it was no longer necessary to take part in this bloody competition. The Marshal of the West clenched his fist and, with a furious expression, made it clear that they had to participate since there was no reason not to do so. According to him, they had to give everything to win. The Marshal of the North exploded with fury and, with a gaze full of rage, reminded them that for them, the World Masters Tournament was a field for testing and competition. But in the eyes of the Martial Saint, it was actually a stage for dispute over energy crystal distribution. The Marshal of the South also clenched his fists, and his eyes widened with seriousness. With a furious gaze, he revealed that in the past, the army always fought for the interests of the three martial saints of the Dragon Kingdom. Now that their opportunity had arrived, how could they not fight for it? With a gaze full of determination, the Marshal of the Central District mentioned that the god of the army's future was about to return, bringing back the glory they had not seen in more than 200 years. He decided to prepare him a great celebratory gift. They decided to go out and celebrate the return of the god of war with a great victory. A few hours later, dusk fell, and in the middle of the city stood the Tower of Martial Saint. Inside was Martial Saint himself, with his arms behind his back as he contemplated views of the city. A ninja arrived at the tower, knelt before him, and reminded him that only 15 days remained until the Great World Tournament of Masters began, asking if he was ready to depart. The Martial Saint began to gaze towards the ground and nodded his head. The ninja, who was holding some reports in his hands, stood up and with a serious voice mentioned that this was the most recent information about that person. This caught the attention of the Martial Saint, who became curious and gave the order for the ninja to withdraw. The ninja handed over the information, and with a leap, he left the tower. He turned towards the tower, clenched his fists, and while falling to the ground, reported that the subordinate of the martial saint was withdrawing. The martial saint took one of the reports where a photo of Lu Shang clenching his fist appeared, and he began to observe our boy in silence. He was Tan Yong-yu. His gaze fixed on the reports, and his eyes began to shine. He started touching his beard and couldn't help but feel surprised to see that Lu Shang was really not dead. Knowing that he would soon return, our boy had been defeated, had been reborn, and was about to reach the level of martial saint. He read carefully, and his eyes widened in surprise upon seeing that with a level 8 body, he had seriously injured martial saint Zhao Jia. Now Lu Shang could be called an unparalleled genius in history. Tan Yong-yu couldn't help but think that he had underestimated him. His eyes began to shine with rage as he started to regret it. But then he closed his eyes and coldly threw the reports out the window, thinking that there was nothing left to regret. His body began to release a powerful martial energy, and his eyes filled with determination. According to him, Zhao Jia was nothing more than a useless old man. While he had reached the level of Grandmaster at 42 years old and by 80 had managed to become a martial saint, his manifestation had reached a size of 1,000 meters, surpassing Zhao Jia hundreds of times. In a life or death confrontation, he would behead him in less than 5 moves. He used his power and launched a powerful blast of blue energy into the sky. Then evil energy began to manifest at one single point. Tan Yong-yu crossed his arms behind his back and began observing it. His martial will was like a golden sword capable of destroying everything. No matter how talented or monstrous Lu Shang was, compared to him, he was nothing. His martial will transformed into a weapon, and Tan Yong-yu grabbed it with his hand. His eyes began to shine with confidence, and with a smile, he made it clear that he was going to be the first to leave this planet. His eyes filled with rage. And he used the celestial slash, forcefully swinging his weapon made of martial will. The attack was so powerful that it cut through the atmosphere and reached space. Somewhere else on the planet, there were some hot springs far from the city. While a man with purple hair was enjoying a bath, someone wearing boots approached him from behind. It was night, and the moon was high in the sky. She was a woman with purple hair dressed as a ninja wearing a mask. She approached him with a curious gaze, asked if Zhao Jia was going to the World Masters tournament. Upon hearing this, Zhao Jia's eyes widened in fury. He turned around and, with an enraged gaze, asked if she thought that in this state he could go to the World Masters tournament. The woman turned her back on him and, with a calm gaze, adjusted her hood and mentioned that she had only asked out of habit. For her, this was a shame because from now on, and for many years, he would not have the right to receive energy crystals. Zhao Jia could not help but clench his fists, and get angry. He began to stare at her and gave her the order to make sure to exchange with the guides the medicine to heal his martial soul. Once he had it, he was going to pay her twice the price. The woman turned her back on him, closed her eyes, and asked him to calm down as it was a unique opportunity, and even if he forgot about it, she would never forget it. Zhao Jia lost his composure and struck the water forcefully. As long as Lin Zheng you could get him 2 bottles of soul-nourishing elixir, he would be able to recover at least 80% of his strength in 3 years. Then, he would restore the foundation of the Extreme Martial Arts Academy and gradually accumulate his power. He could not help but curse Lu Sheng. His eyes widened with fear and rage, as he knew that Lu Sheng was not dead and that sooner or later he would come looking for him. He had to think of a strategy. And if he had no other option, he would do whatever was necessary to obtain the protection of Lin Zhengyu and Tan Zhengyu sins. No matter how strong Lu Sheng was, he would not be able to kill him while under the protection of 2 level 9 martial saints. Then something caught Zhao Jia's attention, and his mind filled with terror. Without hesitating for even a second, he plunged into the water, thinking there was no way Lu Sheng could kill him. The World Masters tournament, held once every 10 years, was about to begin. There were powerful martial warriors from all nations. On the blue planet, all the powerful forces were in motion. Dominant factions from different regions were heading together toward the battlefield. Those few who stood at the pinnacle of humanity had also begun to mobilize. This was the greatest event in the martial world. It was daytime, and the sky was clear. It was a splendid day on the island of the Golden Ring. This event in the martial world was the gathering of gods among men. The martial Saint Harold and his men, who wore elegant suits, set out. Harold, who was at the front of everyone, with a determined gaze, thought that victory this time was going to be theirs. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel. It was daytime and right in front of the Golden Ring Island, something happened and the waves began to form a strange pattern in the ocean. Not long after, the water started to concentrate at a single point, creating a marine whirlpool. This strange event caused the fish and crabs that inhabited the area to come ashore, and many of them lost their lives. Just then, someone whose body was surrounded by golden martial energy elegantly emerged from the marine whirlpool. Upon feeling this, the attention of the martial Saint Harold and his men turned toward the body, causing their jaws and eyes to widen in surprise and confusion. They were all in shock, not knowing what was happening. It was our boy, Liu Sheng. Using his power, he began to create small golden steps and slowly started walking toward the island. They were in shock upon seeing that he had emerged from the sea whirlpool. Harold and his men quickly knelt before Liu Sheng, joined their hands, closed their eyes, and with a respectful demeanor welcomed the martial saint. Harold's eyes were full of fear. While sweating profusely, he realized that Liu Sheng had become stronger. He remembered that Liu Sheng had said he was a level 8 warrior, but it was obvious that he did not have the power of a level 8. If he was a level 8 warrior, then Harold was determined to cut off his own head and join the martial saints of the Dark Star. Using the golden steps, Liu Sheng reached the Golden Ring Island and began to observe Harold in silence. The attention of martial Saint Harold was fixed on him. He thought about the guides and was sure that our boy was at the same level as the guides, and even if he wasn't far from being so. Liu Sheng softly landed on the ground and, with a calm expression, asked if Harold and the others were ready. Harold lowered his head before him as a sign of respect. Liu Sheng's attention was fixed on them, and his eyes widened in surprise because this was very strange to him. He remembered that Harold's experts had died and many had been seriously injured during the attack by Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. He was confused because he did not know how so many experts had appeared again in such a short time. Thinking calmly, it did not take him long to realize that Harold had merged the experts from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society. Harold stood up, extended his hand, and with a pleasant expression mentioned that they were ready to leave at any moment. Liu Sheng looked away, and with a serene gaze said that there was no more time to lose. They boarded a private plane. Harold, who was sitting in the seat next to Liu Sheng, began to observe our boy in silence. Liu Sheng took out an energy crystal, and his attention was fixed on it. He could not help but sink into his thoughts since energy crystals held many secrets. Liu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He brought the energy crystal closer and explained that the energy crystals Harold had given him had been completely absorbed by his body, and now his immortal cells had risen to more than 278. For him, their effect was truly incredible, and it was no wonder that even the strongest of advanced civilizations harvested them as stellar-level resources. Our boy's body began to emit a powerful martial energy. Feeling this, Harold's eyes widened in fear and surprise, making him sweat. His gaze fixed on Liu Sheng's body. Realizing that sitting next to him was like being under the sun while sitting beside a barbecue furnace. Liu Sheng's energy started expanding throughout the plane. Harold closed his eyes and concentrated, realizing that it wasn't just heat but a burning sensation. Every time Liu Sheng breathed, it was as if his body expelled lava. While he was distracted, Liu Sheng clenched his fist, turned towards him, and with a confident gaze caught his attention and asked if he believed that with a single punch he would be able to defeat a martial saint. Upon hearing this, Harold snapped out of his thoughts, and his eyes widened in fear. He couldn't help but swallow hard and feel chills all over his body. He quickly clasped his hands together and bowed his head before our boy, and with a respectful demeanor, revealed that he had a portion of the energy crystals he had collected from Dark Star and the Black Magic Society, promising that he would hand them over to him immediately. With his eyes full of tears, Harold took out a bag full of energy crystals and handed it to Liu Sheng. Our boy's attention was fixed on the bag, and his eyes began to shine with confusion. He didn't know what was happening. If he said that this was not really his intention, Harold would not believe him. Liu Sheng took the bag of energy crystals, and his attention focused on it, making his eyes fill with joy, and a smile spread across his face, adding to what he had before. Liu Sheng now had more than a kilogram of energy crystals, admitting that Harold had many resources and money. Liu Sheng tossed the bag into the air and couldn't help but smile. Harold rested his head on his hand and couldn't help but sigh. This moment reminded him of an old saying from the Dragon Kingdom: accompanying a king was like accompanying a wild tiger. Back then, he didn't understand it very well. But now he fully comprehended it. Liu Sheng turned towards him and began to show a grateful smile, but Harold started to see death itself in our boy's aura for him. Being next to someone who at any moment could decide his life or death was truly like being accompanied by death itself, something terrifying. Liu Sheng rested his hands on the arms of the seat, and his eyes began to shine with hatred, making the energy emerging from his body grow more intense. Because his power had increased too quickly, he still had not mastered many aspects of controlling it properly. To get used to this power, many battles and high-intensity combats were necessary. He began to imagine himself kissing Snowy, something he couldn't do now since he would end up burning her mouth. He began to imagine himself with his arms crossed, next to his charred parents. If he spent too much time with his family, they would end up charred. Liu Sheng's gaze expanded with determination. He placed his hand on his chest. He needed pressure. The last time the guides had taken account, there were 24 level 9 martial saints on the blue planet. Now that 3 had died and some were injured, adding Harold, only 20 remained. He began to imagine all the powerful martial saints of the planet staring at him intently. He didn't know if the 20 martial saints would be able to put pressure on him. If 2 couldn't pressure him, he planned to face 20 or even 30. Liu Sheng turned his head towards the airplane window and with a serious gaze began to observe the landscape. If fighting against all the martial saints was not enough, then there would be no other option but to fight against the so-called guides. The airplane was flying at high speed, and it was already midday. Half an hour later, they arrived at an island, and on top of the mountains, there was a castle. Once the airplane landed, Liu Sheng stepped out, and his attention was fixed on the castle. Harold, who was standing behind him, extended his hands and explained that this place was called the Island of the Thousand Sages, which had been named by the World Martial Arts Association. Liu Sheng's eyes widened with joy, and a confident smile appeared on his face. Seeing that the island was called the Island of the Thousand Sages, he could not deny that the martial saints of the blue planet had rather grand aspirations. Then, he asked Harold what was next. Harold closed his eyes and put his hand inside his suit, explaining that before the start of the tournament, there was a party mainly for martial arts masters to exchange ideas and resources. Additionally, they could take advantage of the occasion to submit to the World Martial Arts Association a list of items they wished to trade. Liu Sheng became curious and began listening to Harold in silence. The martial saint Harold took out a list and asked our boy to take a look at it. Liu Sheng took the list, and his eyes widened in surprise. On the list, there was information about Life Nutrient Liquid number 3, which had a certain nourishing effect on the martial soul, and could strengthen the manifestation of the Dharma. The price was 2 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. There was also Tempered Life Liquid number 3, which had a certain refining effect on the martial body and could strengthen it. It had the same price as the Nutrient Liquid, 2 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. While holding the list with one hand, Liu Sheng turned to Harold and, with a curious expression, mentioned that all available items for exchange were designed for martial saints. The lowest price was at least 1 kilogram of energy crystals. He realized that things hadn't gone well for Harold as a level 9 martial saint since he hadn't been able to save even 1 kilogram in over 100 years. Upon hearing this, Harold's eyes began to shine with embarrassment. He panicked and, with a forced smile, explained that the reason was that he had already exchanged some things before. So now he didn't have much wealth on hand. However, Several martial saints with whom he had a good relationship still owed him quite a few energy crystals, promising that once he collected them, he would hand them over to Liu Sheng. A smile spread across our boy's face since he couldn't believe that the old fox Harold had an ace up his sleeve. Something caught our boy's attention, making him curious. His gaze fixed on the list, where there was also an item called Level 10 Will Protection Talisman. It contained the will of a Level 10 expert and could be activated at will. But its exchange price was 30 kilograms of energy crystals per unit. Liu Sheng remembered when that bastard Zhao Ji spat out a talisman while on the brink of death. He grabbed the list again, and his eyes widened in surprise, realizing that Zhao Ji had paid 30 kilograms for the talisman. He began to imagine Martial Saint Zhao Ji smiling and making various rare items float. After being the human god of the Dragon Kingdom for more than 100 years, his wealth was not something that a mere organization leader like Harold could match. And it was very likely that he had also kept the inheritance of many martial saints who had fallen in battle during the war between the Dragon and Lion Kingdoms. Liu Sheng's eyes widened with hatred. He knew that these things were surely only meant to deceive martial saints from remote villages. He started imagining the guides with items hanging from their fingers. He, better than anyone else, knew that guides took leftovers from their civilizations, things they no longer used, to give them to martial saints. And in this way, they managed to make them sell their souls for the items. First, the guides impoverished them by 90%, then they exchanged trash with them. And finally, they took 10% of the energy crystals, making it a perfect business. Liu Sheng began walking toward the castle and threw the list into the air. Knowing that only by leaving the blue star and setting foot in the vast universe could one understand how immense and magnificent it truly was. Only then would they be able to stand on equal footing with true martial artists. A few hours later, the party began, and somewhere in the castle was the dressing room. Inside was Liu Sheng, who was getting dressed in front of a mirror. He started adjusting his tie and couldn't help but smile, not knowing if the guests would be able to recognize him if he stood before everyone. Harold, who was behind, extended his hands and with a smile mentioned that Liu Sheng's disguise was perfect, and although his appearance had changed, he still dazzled like a deity, radiant and perfect. With a serious expression, Liu Sheng explained that even if Harold made his adulation sound like flattery, he would still have to hand over every last gram of energy crystals he owed. Harold placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and with a smile promised to do so and decided to go ahead. The guests began to enjoy the party, some drinking alcohol and others conversing among themselves. Liu Sheng came out of the dressing room and started walking through the hall, his attention fixed on the others. Everyone here had at least a Grandmaster level, not only standing out in power, but also in appearance, realizing that this was truly a gathering of the planet's elite. Nothing like the boring birthday celebration of the Chen family. Among those at the party were Dong Shenghe and Lin Wanwen talking to each other. As Liu Sheng passed nearby, his gaze fixed on them. Seeing his brother-in-law's spirit, he noticed that he had resumed his martial path. Dong Shenghe had shaved his hair. With a kind smile, he began to converse with Lin Wanwen. Seeing this, Liu Sheng couldn't help but smile. He didn't know if this was a symbol of starting from scratch. Liu Sheng started walking through the hall and began looking at all the guests. He wanted to see if there were any other old acquaintances. Just then, something caught Liu Sheng's attention, making him stop and turn to the side. At the party were also the marshals of the army, who were chatting among themselves with a smile. Liu Sheng began observing them and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused upon seeing that even the army of the Dragon Kingdom was here. Although they did not have their own martial saint, they had still come to fight for Tan Zhongyu and Lin Zhengyu's interests, and had even brought their most precious treasure, the old yet unbreakable sword. He was curious without knowing whether he should approach them. Just then, a portal opened in front of everyone. Seeing this, they couldn't help but feel joyful and excited. Everyone clenched their fists because Miss Flona, the flower of the alliance, had arrived. Liu Sheng's gaze fixed on the portal, and his eyes widened in surprise. A beautiful woman with long hair emerged from the portal and began walking through the hall, causing all the men to start cheering for her. Liu Sheng was mesmerized as he watched Flona. To him, a fairy tale princess would not be more dazzling than her, and her genetics were exceptionally perfect, far above ordinary. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, it was daytime, and somewhere on the island was located the Great Hall. Warner, subordinate of the Marshal Saint Harold, arrived at the island. But as soon as he arrived, someone gave him a powerful blow to the stomach, making his body shoot backward, leaving a trail of energy. The blow was so powerful that he couldn't help but open his mouth and start bleeding. Warner's body fell several meters back, he placed his hand on his chest, and his eyes widened in fear. He finally realized that the Society of Black Magic had allied with Dark Star from the beginning. Just before Warner could have another thought, someone attacked with a powerful energy projectile, piercing Warner's head as if it were a melon and thus killing him instantly. It was the man with angel wings that we saw before. He had fired an energy projectile from his finger and now smoke was coming out of it. Warner's body fell to the ground. The man closed his eyes and could not help but clench his teeth since according to him they were very weak. He and Lei were in front of the Great Hall and behind them was a mountain of corpses. Just then, a powerful thunder descended from the sky onto the island. Feeling this, the man with angel wings turned around and his gaze fixed on the thunder. He could not help but smile upon seeing that he had returned. Lei started adjusting his glasses with his finger and an excited smile spread across his face upon seeing that Harold had returned. A powerful martial spirit surrounded by a powerful energy and Harold's men began to run toward the Great Hall. Within the spirit was the marshal. He started pointing at Lei with his finger and could not help but become enraged upon seeing that they had massacred his men and destroyed part of the island. It did not take him long to realize that Darkstar and the Black Magic Society had joined forces. He was so furious that even if he killed them 1,000 times, it would not be enough. Upon hearing this, the man with angel wings began to gaze at the ground and couldn't help but smile. He used his power, causing his to transform into a powerful martial spirit with wings. He crossed his arms and, with a smile, mocked Harold, saying that everyone knew how to talk, challenging him to come and try to kill him if he had the guts. Consumed by hatred, Harold did not hold back and commanded his martial spirit to attack. While the spirit's eyes were glowing, it clenched its fists and began charging at the spirit. The spirit of the man with angel wings also started advancing quickly, ready to attack. The fists of the powerful martial spirits clashed against each other, creating a great wave of energy capable of blinding anyone and shattering the ground into pieces. Lei took off his glasses and his gaze fixed on Harold. His eyes began to shine with seriousness. He knew that he also had to fight because otherwise his friend was going to say that he had obtained credits without making any effort. Lei used his power, causing energy to begin to emerge from his body. His energy also manifested and transformed into a martial spirit, which began to stare at Harold. With a calm gaze, Lei began to point towards the sky and concentrated, releasing energy. He used his power, forming a stellar constellation in the sky, causing his martial spirit to raise its hand. And not long after, martial fire began to emerge from its body. The spirit began to point at Harold, causing a powerful energy to emerge from the stars and strike against Harold's martial spirit. It knelt down and put its arms over its head, beginning to roar in pain. Harold's men were also injured and 2 of them were lying on the ground. One of them, who had bruises on his face, propped himself up on the ground with the help of his arms and his gaze fixed on Lei's martial spirit. His eyes widened in surprise and fear. 2 martial saints were attacking Harold at the same time. So he thought that this time Golden Ring Island was going to be destroyed. The other man couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and feel furious. Harold, who had his arms over his head and was defending himself from the attack, started observing Lei and soon realized that this was not good. One of the subordinates that Harold had brought clenched his fist in, with a desperate gaze, explained that the battle of the level 9 warriors was beyond their reach. Asking what to do now. They felt totally useless. Lei's gaze fixed on them. He extended his hand toward them and with a smile mentioned that now that they had come, they should also stay. He used his power, making his martial spirit attack with a powerful slap, which crushed 2 of the men in the blink of an eye, without giving them a chance to react. The attack was so powerful that they lost their lives. The remaining men fell on their butts to the ground and their eyes filled with fear. Now that Harold was busy fighting against 2 martial saints, everyone else was going to be massacred. Harold began to stare at Lei and with a furious expression revealed that he knew Darkstar and the Black Magic Society were secretly working together. He asked if they weren't ashamed to attack his base. While Lei's body was surrounded by energy, he extended his hand and his attention fixed on Harold. And with a smile he mentioned that Harold should remember that if one has the advantage to attack, one must do it to take the lead, revealing that even if today they couldn't kill him. After eliminating all the high-level warriors on the island, Harold would not be able to continue fighting for the energy crystals. At that moment, Lei's eyes widened in surprise as something caught his attention. Lu Shang left the laboratory and arrived at the Great Hall, which was filled with corpses, with a confident smile. Our boy began to walk toward Lei and the others. Lu Shang's eyes were shining with confidence, and his gaze was fixed on Harold. Lei couldn't help but feel confused upon seeing an Oriental on the Golden Ring Island, nor did he know why he was so confident, or why he wasn't afraid. Lu Shang did not change his attitude, which was an insult to Lei. He used his power, causing the hand of his martial spirit to begin descending upon Lu Shang. Our boy remained calm, started observing the spirit, and did not move. Just before the spirit could attack, Lu Shang raised a finger and placed it in front, making an intense glow emerge from it. Without much effort, our boy blocked the powerful attack of a martial saint using a finger, leaving everyone in shock. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine and his gaze fixed on Lei, with an arrogant smile. He asked if this wasn't interesting. Seeing that Lu Shang had blocked the attack of a martial saint with a simple finger, the jaw of martial saint Harold dropped and his eyes filled with surprise. According to him, this was impossible. Lei, who was inside the martial spirit, was speechless, and while he was trying to process the situation, Lu Shang moved like lightning and in an instant appeared in front of him and began to stare at him. Just before Lei had time to react, Lu Shang reached out toward him and used his power, shattering his martial spirit into pieces as if it were glass. Lu Shang's attack struck Lei's chest, sending his body flying out of the martial spirit. His eyes widened in fear and confusion as he did not know how it was possible for someone so strong to exist. The spirit of the man with angel wings was flying, while on the other side, Harold's was crouching on the ground. Lu Shang's attack was so powerful that Lei's body was sent flying several kilometers backward and crashed forcefully into the sea. Lu Shang's body, who was flying, began to emit golden energy. The muscular man's gaze fixed on him. He was speechless upon seeing that Lei had been defeated with a single blow. With an expression full of fear, he asked who Lu Shang was and where he had come from. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with hatred. He turned towards them and, with a piercing gaze, proclaimed himself as God. Upon hearing this, the two martial saints began to observe Lu Shang in silence, creating tension. The attention of Harold's subordinates, who was still alive, was fixed on Lu Shang. Their eyes widened in surprise and confusion. They were in shock, not knowing if he was really a god. They could not believe that Professor Nepson's ridiculous deception was real. Professor Nepson also left the laboratory and arrived at the Great Hall. He placed a hand on the pillar and began to observe Lu Shang. He was open-mouthed upon seeing that Lu Shang had defeated a martial saint with a single blow. According to him, this god had great power. The devout Nepson fell to his knees on the ground and extended his hands. For him, Lu Shang was the true god, and under his power, even the martial saints would disappear until they turned to ashes. Lu Shang was equal to the god he had seen in his dreams. Lucia appeared behind him, knelt before Lu Shang, and her eyes filled with amazement upon seeing that this was real and not an illusion. She was seeing a god with her own eyes. The man with angel wings and Herald deactivated their martial spirits and their attention fixed on Lu Shang. Both were in shock, not knowing what to do. Lu Shang turned towards them, began to show a finger, and with a penetrating gaze made it clear that of the two, only one could live. Upon hearing this, Herald's and the man with angel wings' eyes widened in surprise and confusion. They could not believe that someone dared to mock them in this way. Consumed by hatred, the man with angel wings clenched his teeth, thinking that this was a bad joke. Then he extended his hand and began to gather energy. His eyes began to shine with determination. Once he finished gathering energy, he extended his hand towards Lu Shang and launched a powerful energy arrow at him, revealing that the one who was going to die was Lu Shang. As the energy arrow was slowly approaching, our boy remained silent. Lu Shang prepared to counterattack, extended his hand towards him and used the technique he had learned called cutting the sky, causing a powerful golden energy to emerge from his hand, sweeping away the energy arrow. Just before the man with angel wings had time to react, Lu Shang's attack reached him and cut his waist in half, separating his body into two. His eyes widened in fear, as he did not know how it was possible that someone like him had been defeated with a single attack. Then, the powerful martial spirit of Master Ding Kai Yu appeared in the sky and slowly began to fade away. Harold fell to his knees on the ground, lowered his head before Lu Shang, clenched his teeth, and showed respect for him, explaining that now that one of them had been eliminated, there was no need to kill him as well. Lu Shang descended to the ground and began to observe Harold in silence. With a cold gaze, he made it clear that even level 9 martial masters were still human and therefore could feel fear, revealing that in reality, he never intended to kill Harold since after all, he had been taking advantage of Wan Iron for so long. If he killed the leader, it would be too cruel. Harold and his men knelt down and bowed their heads before Lu Shang. With a piercing expression, Lu Shang began to observe them and explained that now he finally understood why when the Supreme Martial Master appeared, those from the army knelt before him. If the very sky suddenly descended in front of you, you wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure and would choose to prostrate yourself, and now Lu Shang was the sky. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, please subscribe our channel and like and share the video. Welcome to our channel.